Hello and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Shreya Paropkari, Senior Manager, Farm Animal Protection and Cruelty Response from Humane Society International, India. A lawyer by qualification and practice, Shreya oversees all projects and campaigns for farm animal protection and cruelty response undertaken by HSI India. Her responsibilities include advocating for policy change, capacity building of law enforcement agencies, judiciary, and grassroots activists to tackle animal cruelty and abuse. She has served as a resource person on prevention of cruelty in animals in sensitization workshops for police departments, state judicial academy, and taught courses on animal protection laws at several law schools in India. In our session today, Shreya will shed light on how to work towards enforcement, identifying missing links and gaps in enforcing laws. She will also give an overview of regulations pertaining directly or indirectly to the poultry, dairy, and aquaculture industries. I would also like to inform the participants that we will be hosting a question answer session after Shreya's talk. So please feel free to send in your question in the Ask a Question box on the mid left side of your screen. Over to you, Shreya.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you for having me here. I think just a quick audio check. You can hear me fine?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I'll just take 1 minute to share screen and put up my PPT. I have a few visuals. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Neha. So as Neha mentioned, I'm an advocate and a senior consultant with Humane Society International India. You may already have attended some animal agriculture sessions at this event from some of my colleagues. So if there are any repetitions, please ignore them. Before I delve into my session, I want to give everyone a reference point, a perspective that I find helpful when working towards farmed animal protection. So, if you compare the time that animals have been domesticated to the rest of the natural history, domestication is just a tiny portion of the animal's total history of acquiring adaptive changes. On the chart, if you can see each bar that's on the chart equals 1 million years. At the end, on the bottom right, is the present day. The earliest galliform, the earliest chicken, evolved about 57 million years ago. The earliest pig was around maybe 35 million years ago. Bovids, cows entered the scene about 18 million years ago. And the time span over which domestication occurred from the time of their existence is that thin yellow line that you see in the last bar on the bottom right. It's just a tiny blip in time compared to the total evolutionary history of these animals. It is insignificant compared to the rest of the species' natural history. So domestication was a couple of thousand years ago, and within that, industrialized animal agriculture is a couple of decades old. It's just a perspective or reference point we need to remember when we look at farmed animal issues world over. However, in this little span of time, more than, as of today, 80 billion land animals are raised for food globally. The number of individual fish and shellfish is almost impossible to count. And so there are identified by weight. 150 million tons of seafood was produced for human consumption in 2016, with nearly half of that coming from aquaculture. Let me help you visualize this number. At any given time, the number of living farm animals are approximately 3 times the number of humans. By some tremendous feat of industrialization, through perfected calculations of minimum input and maximum output, with a very, very narrow objective of profit maximization, billions of animals are raised to live in deplorable conditions. They suffer extremely. They are raised in intensive confinement and are slaughtered by means that are far, far from humane. Although when I say humane, far from humane, I don't mean to imply that there's such a thing as humane slaughter. That is an oxymoron. I mean the least painful way amongst all the ways that we've discovered to kill animals. Animals have not always been reared in intensive confinement as they are now. Over the decades, each animal species that we felt we must eat was squeezed into smaller and smaller spaces on larger and larger operations with a singular motive of profit for a handful of companies. Let me show you in context, because we're talking particularly about poultry, dairy, and aquaculture. Just a few videos from what this would look like. That's what a layer hen facility looks like. The last video that you saw was at an aquaculture pond. This removal of the fish from the water is what is called as harvest. So the fish, once they reach the optimum slaughter weight, are removed from the ponds, are harvested from the ponds, where they are collected in this area. They're still alive, then they're boxed in thermocol boxes, which are layered in ice. Then they're put in the ice boxes and transported. This one was particularly taken in Andhra Pradesh, and it was the consignment was to be traveling from Andhra Pradesh to West Bengal. It's a good more than 24 hours of transport, and unfortunately, a lot of the fish live through this ordeal. Because the ice melts and water collects in the boxes, and so they're still able to breathe, but barely so. So this is generally what aquaculture looks like. But we must recognize that not only does factory farming significantly impact the welfare and lives of billions of animals, but it also has a negative effect on the environment and on sustainability. It has adverse effects on human health, on labor welfare. Unfortunately, the animal agriculture industry has largely escaped the radar of regulatory correction, despite being more polluting than the oil industry, the tobacco industry, and being just almost as polluting as the transportation, global transportation. Now, what part of this system is impacting the welfare of animals that we rear for food? We can generally categorize this impacts largely, and I'm not talking about particularly dairy or poultry or aquaculture. Overarching welfare concerns could be bucketed into 4 categories: trait selection, housing and transport conditions, and slaughter. Sorry. What trait selection is it's selective breeding. You may be able to connect the issues relating to selective breeding with that of drum breeding. The idea is to identify those traits that are considered profitable. For example, layers are trait selected to lay a large number of eggs, more and more eggs that they have to lay, almost an egg every day. Broilers are trait selected to grow morbidly obese in less and less time with less and less food intake. Cattle must produce more and more food, milk. But why is trait selection bad if it's making the animals more productive? Because one, when this trait selection is being done by the companies that produce these animals, the impact of this trait selection on increasing productivity, on the welfare of the animal or the health of the animal is not considered. So the morbid obesity that a broiler hen has to undergo, it's just the trait selection just is for the muscle to develop. So the muscle of a broiler becomes fatty in that 40-45 days that it takes for it to grow to the full size. The muscle is fat, but the rest of the bird is still a chick. The vocalizations are that of a chick. The skeletal system is that of a chick. So for the bird that has the muscle of an adult and the skeletal system of a chick, it is not able to walk when it's full weight without fracturing itself under its own weight. The health implications of trait selections in layers where they are laying almost 1 egg every day. For the production of the egg, it is the minerals, the resources that are required for making an egg are depleting from the hen's body. So the impact on the well-being of the bird is not considered when the trait selection is happening, because the sole aim is productivity and profit. What is more alarming and probably more visible to us now is that most of these trait selected species are developed by a few companies, very handful of companies. For instance, 95% of the broiler breeds, the high yield broiler breeds, are owned by 5 companies or 7 companies globally. So it's a very limited genetic pool. What occurs when you are creating the same few breeds and is that there is weakened immune systems, and weakened immune systems make them more and more susceptible to diseases. The downside, of course, of the weakened immune system is that they get sick easier. What makes it worse is that when they are confined, when they are overcrowded in these small cramped spaces, there's even better chance for whatever disease, whatever virus or bacteria affects them to transmit that much more faster. A scientist said this about the H5N1, the avian influenza virus. H5N1 has evolved great virulence amongst chickens only because of the way the conditions under which the animals are kept, crammed together in cages, packed into giant warehouses. H5N1 was originally a mild form of virus found in migrating ducks. If it killed its host immediately, it too would die. But when its next host's beak is just an inch away, the virus can evolve to kill quickly and still survive. So not only are we making the immune systems of these birds, not only are we suppressing their immune systems, we're also making it that much easier for virus to transmit because we put them in giant, large operations where they are crammed so close next to each other that stand on each other. That is one major concern that you might see, considering that we're in pandemic. That we might consider more seriously when we think about farm animals. If you check in newspapers, no matter what state you're in, you're bound to see reports of avian flu. Last year, it had spread across 10 states. The second category of concern, the housing conditions. Overcrowding that you'll see in poultry, in dairy, in aquaculture. Layers, that's the egg-laying hens, are crammed in cages called the battery cages. They're called battery cages because they're stacked right next to each other, like batteries, and stacked right next to each other and in 3 to 5 tiers, so one on top of the other as well. Each unit of a battery cage can hold up to 10,000, 12,000 birds. When they're crammed in such large numbers, with each section of the cage having maybe 6 to 8 birds at least, they have to stand on each other. They can't all utilize the same floor space. Cattle in dairies are tied on such short ropes and in such close proximity that they can all not sit and stand up simultaneously. Some of them have to be standing, some of them have to be sitting. They have to take turns because of how little floor space there is. In gestation crates, which are crates in which female pigs, sows, are kept for their gestation period, in these gestation crates, all sows can do is stand and sit in the same position. They're not able to so much as turn their neck because there is no space. It's like a straight jump. There is behavioral deprivation because of this overcrowding, because of the lack of space. Each animal has behaviors that come to them instinctively, that are necessary for their biological functions, for their physiological functions, for their psychological functions. All of these animals are social animals. They need to forage, they need to groom, they need to socialize with each other. Hence, in fact, the need for hens to nest is so strong, primarily because it's a trigger response, it's a hormonal trigger. When the hen is in oviposition, that is when the hen is ready to lay an egg, there is a hormone that triggers a reaction that sends a signal to the brain that makes the hen want to find a nest space that is private, where she can create a safe space to lay her egg. So it's not just something that she does, it's something that she needs to do, that she's compelled to do. We often forget that hens are birds, and so they perch and they nest and they preen. But they do all of these behaviors, and they're very important. Cleaning and preening is important because that's how they get rid of parasites. Dust bathing is important for the same reason. They socialize because that's how they learn how to forage, they learn how to communicate with each other. because they socialize. And none of these activities are possible for a hen in a battery cage. It's the same for broilers. It's the same for cattle. Cattle have a whole range of behaviors, very sensitive animals. Pigs have a whole range of behaviors. Pigs also love to wallow and forage. None of these behaviors are possible in a intensive confinement facility, whether it's gestation crates, whether it's battery cages, whether it's overcrowded dairies. But this has, there is a lot of science to say that this has not only impacts on their physical well-being, but also their mental well-being. Another effect of being confined in such systems is that they are prone to metabolic diseases. The constant confinement, the lack of exercise, the lack of movement alone gives them so many diseases. Layers are prone to something called as cage layer fatigue, fatty liver syndrome, where fats deposit on their liver and their liver hemorrhages. These are all very, very painful conditions that are associated just with being confined. Transport is another issue. Of course, poor air quality, because the waste disposal there's no system of waste disposal. The waste is collected where the animals live. So the air quality is understandably horrible. Because of the number of animals purely, there is no individual care or veterinary attention that's provided to these animals. There is feed additives, which is a growing concern across the world because of antimicrobial resistance, because we feed antibiotics. When you keep animals in such confined facilities and they're trade selected and they're immune suppressed, it is a given that you have to probably pump them with antibiotics just to keep them safe from diseases. But antibiotics are also used as growth hormones, especially in broilers, to make them grow fatter faster. So that's another concern, the feed additives. This is not, by no means, this is an exhaustive list of all the welfare concerns. But again, these are generic to the animals, to all the farmed animals. But when you assess each of the animals' needs versus what is deprived to them in these confinement facilities, you'll be able to identify more specific welfare concerns in each of these systems for each of these animals. Transport, of course, is another concern. It's carried out horribly. It's out there for everybody to see, open. It's not like in factory farm facilities where they're housed and bred. It's something that you might see on a daily basis. Smaller animals that are grabbed, thrown into cages, they're stuffed, so much so that they're crushed beneath each other. Then they're ripped out of the vehicles when they're being deposited at the meat shops. Larger animals are forced to move to get on the vehicle, mostly without ramps. So they end up getting fractures, which restricts their movement. So to force them to move again when they have to get them out of the vehicles, they have chilies and other irritants rubbed into their eyes, rubbed into other orifices of their body, just to shock them and pain them into movement. We might have seen, I'm sure everybody might have seen, hens and goats and sheep that are hung upside down in the back of scooters, on the handle of cycles. Most of the injuries that these animals suffer, grievous injuries, are during transport. But by the time that they are being transported, they've been through the whole system of the trade selection. These lived in these horrible housing conditions, that they're in completely weakened states, especially the layers, which have brittle bones by the end of their laying cycle, because they've laid so many eggs and all of the calcium has come out of their body. The egg, in laying the egg, that by the time they're out of these systems, by the time they stop laying an egg every day, their bones are so brittle, so much as a squeeze will break them. most of the injuries that any of these animals suffer is during transport. I don't need to delve probably into, don't need to delve into the slaughter aspect, just to go over the what I've laid out. There are, of course, unhygienic conditions. The people who may be slaughtering the animals are probably untrained. There's a whole lot of improper waste management, effluents that are discharged. Of course, in many places, especially poultry, there is no poultry slaughterhouse in the country. Though no animals can be slaughtered anywhere but safe licensed slaughterhouse. There is improper waste disposal. Traceability is a problem because you don't know, because the size of these operations where the animals are grown, you don't know which animal is coming from where. So there's absolutely no traceability. If it turns out that the meat from this animal is infected or the animal is diseased, there's no way to link it back to the facility that it comes from. So that's another major issue. So, fortunately or unfortunately, we have laws that regulate most of these aspects, and they are enforced, except for laws for fish. And in a second, we'll delve into what those are. For one, our constitution recognizes animal protection. I'm sure you'll hear this a lot. You have your Article 48, which makes it a duty of the state to organize animal agriculture and animal husbandry on modern and scientific lines, which none of the current intensive animal agriculture practices are scientific, definitely not modern. However, it's the state's duty to consider modern scientific lines when organizing animal husbandry. We have the infamous duty to have compassion for all living creatures. That's applicable to everybody. We have, of course, the Supreme Court in the Jallikattu case, where it observed that the statutory rights guaranteed to animals under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act was like the fundamental rights guaranteed to us in the Constitution. It observed that animals have the right to dignity beyond just being of instrumental value to human beings. In terms of regulations, what else do we have? We, of course, have the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, 1960. That's the backbone of the cruelty laws in this country, anti-cruelty laws in this country. But the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act is just that. It's from the singular lens of cruelty. But consider the impacts that we discussed earlier on. The adverse impacts that factory farming or intensive animal agriculture has on environment, on public health, on labor welfare, and so many other statutes come into play. Environmental regulations, all the rules that come under the EPA, the Air Act, the Water Act, the municipal laws in states have municipal laws that govern establishment of shops and so many other issues. You have the food safety laws that govern slaughter. Slaughter was governed by many legislations before this. The Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act also has rules pertaining to slaughter. But in 2006, a lot of laws around food were amalgamated into one, and slaughter also became a part of that. The food safety and standards, licensing and registration, food businesses 2011 regulatory act. In chapter 4, talk extensively about slaughter, of the infrastructure in a slaughterhouse, how the animals are to be slaughtered, and it's a pretty good legislation. There are food safety laws that indirectly provide for animal welfare, while the intent of these laws is not animal welfare, because of how they frame, because of their mandate, because there is that overlap, these laws still provide and can be utilized for animal welfare. You have labor laws. We talked about labor. There's not fair wages paid to the people that work on, to the workers on these intensive confinement facilities. A lot of the time, the children that live on the premises with the workers, with their parents, are forced for no other reason that there is no resources for the kids to go to school or do anything else other than to support the parents in the manual labor that they do. So labor law would be applicable in more ways than one. There are central motor vehicle rules that provide for how animals may be transported, and identification of vehicles particularly that can be used only for the transport of animals. We have conservation laws that are remotely, and again, this is not a question, but remotely maybe usable for aquaculture. When I say conservation laws, I'm talking about conservation of habitats and environments, whether it's the coastal regulations, whether it is inland, all of that, or Fisheries Act, all of that towards conservation as well. So all of those laws could be bucketed in. So there are many, many regulations, and it is up to anybody who is looking at an issue of farmed animals and thinking, how do I address this? If we are ever looking at it from a singular focus of animal cruelty, it is not going to go very forward, because there are so many intersectionalities. There are so many impacts that this has. There are so many groups and communities that are affected by intensive animal agriculture. People that live in the vicinity of battery cage facilities, if they're in a vicinity less than, if they're within the 5-kilometer radius of these facilities, you can be sure they have respiratory distresses, that there is a whole lot of public nuisance. So it is up to whoever is looking at the issue to see beyond the animals and identify all of the impacts that this issue is having, and work together to address the issue from every angle. But I want to mention again that laws come from various sources. Again, to use layered hens and battery cages as an example, to go over an example of how a combination of laws from different sources can be applicable. So the laws I mentioned in the previous slide are acts of the parliament or of the state. They are legislations. But laws can also come in the form of government orders, in the form of executive orders. For instance, with the battery cage issue, the Animal Welfare Board of India issued an advisory for phase out of battery cages because they're violating of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. The government of India issued directives for implementation of that. It was government orders, executive orders, and circulars in different states that prevented gestation crate facility, the first gestation crate facility and the first mega dairy from being set up in the country. These were supported by expert body reports and the recommendations that the expert bodies have given. Courts have delved into the matter where perhaps the law was not clear, whether it's the Supreme Court, the High Court, different tribunals like the National Green Tribunal, commissions, even lower courts. There are several matters across the country that are seeking relief for farmed animals in different platforms, in all of these forums that I mentioned. And addressing this through as many platforms and as many sources, and with considering all the intersectionalities there are, is the only thing that would bring the movement forward. But of course, we are still identifying all of these opportunities that are available. And for anybody interested, again, these are long-term, very, very long-term campaigns. And so for anybody that's interested in working towards farm animal protection, most of the speakers that you might see who might be talking about animal agriculture are probably working towards it. So I encourage you to do that. Just an example that there are so many countries that have prohibited battery cages across the world. Some have prohibited the gestation crates as well. But not everyone has been banning it in the interest of animal welfare. EU banned it, in fact, because out of concern for food safety and not because of animal welfare. So there's not just one road forward. What interventions can we make? Even though we are in 2022 and there are more efficient and less awful ways to get protein, the human race is heavily dependent on animals for it. But it is not prudent to think that change can be effected overnight. To reverse the way in which we see animals, to reverse what industrialization has done, industrialization of animal agriculture has done, these require long-term action plans. But the principles for intervention in farmed animal welfare are the 3 R's. Reduction of consumption of animal protein, replacement of animal products with non-animal alternatives, and the refinement of production methods, moving away from intensive confinement to systems that are higher welfare, not cruelty-free, higher welfare. Thank you for listening. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take.
Thank you for your talk, Shreya. It was really an insightful one, and I'm sure a really educative one. But in the interest of time, we may not be able to take questions. So I would like to thank you for coming out today and giving this wonderful presentation. And thank you to all the participants for joining us today.